Hi everyone, Text Talks here. So what I'm going to attempt to do, and I'm not sure if I'm going to upload this at the time of me recording, I'm going to have to see how the voice comes out. I am going to probably disappoint, but also probably excite a lot of people at once. I'm going to come clean on kind of a general overview of the aspect system, how I was going to present it if I continued the series. And this video is not me coming out and saying that I'm not going to finish the series. I might. But at this point, I feel like I kind of just gonna get the thoughts out there. And, well, maybe I'll put something else over this intro later. But I think I'm just going to jump into it. I'm going to quickly overview kind of my meta-narrative take on the aspect system. This wasn't the entire thing I was planning to say about the aspect system, but it is a big chunk of it. It was kind of going to be, this wasn't, I had a whole other thing I wanted to say about the aspect system regarding the ultimate riddle and the platonic forms thing that I was going on, but this was a big part of it, and probably the only part that I felt like no one else was really going to cover in a way that I wanted it covered, because it's my own sort of theory, I guess you could say. And considering how the aspect system just kind of got a lot more explanation recently, and how everything that got revealed seemed to be completely in line with what I thought already, I figured this is a good time to just kind of overview all of it. So I feel like I'm rambling. I'm just going to get into it. So all of the aspects, and I think optomisticDuelist, the other Homestuck YouTuber, kind of summarized. I gave him permission to summarize what I had talked to him about it. He mentioned what I thought, which is that all of the aspects have, in addition to all of their other interpretations, a meta-narrative interpretation, some kind of greater explanation, that they all represented some aspect of storytelling itself, kind of. And I had started to get towards that with the aspects that I had covered, but I'm going to kind of recover those just real quick to get them out of the way so that I can cover everything. And let me bring up a list real fast of all 12 so that I have them in front of me. Whoops, aspects, Homestuck. Okay, so here they are, all 12. So let's start with the ones I've talked about already. We'll start with light and void, and I am a void player myself, so of course void is my favorite. But I'd already kind of covered light and void representing the spotlight, the meta-narrative spotlight. So players that are light players tend to have a very easy time finding themselves at the center of the events, the center of the story. The spotlight is on them. Vriska is the thief of light. She quite literally steals the spotlight. I've said this before, right? Equius has a very hard time being influential in the story. Same with Roxy. She has a hard time being influential around her friends. This is the difference between being in the spotlight whereas being out of the spotlight, the complement of the spotlight, being void. So that's light and void. I mentioned those in my videos already, and I'm not going to say much more about them because I already have in other videos. I'll talk about breath and blood a little later. I talked about breath, but I didn't talk about my meta-narrative interpretation of breath, so we'll get to that. The other one I mentioned is rage. And when I put that 5-minute video out on Gamzee, I got a lot of flack for it. A lot of people thought that I was being an apologist towards Homestuck's issues. And the reason that they thought that, I think, is largely, I mean, I'm sure people would think that even after this, but at the time that I recorded that video, I was expecting another video to follow it really quickly, one that I had the audio recorded for at the time, and I still have the audio recorded for, a much longer 20-minute video on hope. And but I never got to it, and that's my fault, and I still have it recorded, and I still want to make it, and what really happened is I just got really burnt out on the editing. I just didn't want to do it, and I have a hard time doing anything if I'm not excited about it. If someone would like to edit that for me, I don't have the money to pay them, and that's why I haven't asked anybody to do it, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But anyway, but hope and rage were references to, they represent plot contrivance and plot coherence. Hope is obviously plot coherence, and rage is obviously plot contrivance. And I have that's probably, in terms of all of this stuff, probably the hardest sell, because it's the most complicated. But I think I do have a very, very convincing case to make in that audio that I have recorded already. But I can briefly summarize it anyway. So obviously Gamzee represents a lot of, he is destroyed by plot contrivance. He destroys a lot of the story, or he at least threatens the story through plot contrivance just by doing all of the bullshit he does, coming back to life, etc. And I mean, man, this is the hardest to talk about in this video because I already have the audio recorded for Hope in the next video, and I also discuss like Rage at the same time because they're complementary. What should I say here? Maybe I'll come back to these at the end. Well, let me talk about Jake real fast. Jake has a big part to play in plot coherence, because when you first meet Jake, he has so much potential in the gaps that he can fill in the story. I mean, I remember, just think about like all the people that were like, man, this guy is going to like tie all the stuff together in the craziest ways. He is Lord English. He's got think about all of the different like red herrings in his room. There were so many possibilities for ways that he could like add to the story. And of course he's a page, so he had a lot of trouble doing that. But I think that as a page of Hope, Jake could have very much steered the plot in any way that he wanted. He could have, like, I mean, think about it. He wished a friend. He wished a character out of thin air. He conjured up like a plot relevant character with his imagination. He could have steered the plot anywhere that he wanted to if he got his shit together. And I say a lot more about that and about all of the other Hope and Rage players. I think I have a really convincing case to make. I'd really like to put that video out. Maybe I'll just put the audio out at some point. I'm not sure yet. But that's Hope and Rage. Plot contrivance and plot coherence. I'm going to take a few seconds to kind of rest and collect my thoughts. So, heart and mind. Heart and mind represents the audience, or the various ways that the audience contributes to the story. And I think, considering Homestuck the story that it is, heart and mind is one of the most important two aspects, to me at least. I like to think that, this isn't a good theory unless there's some quick wording for stuff that makes everything very clear. And so, heart and mind are referring to fan interpretation and fan speculation. Heart refers to fan interpretation. Mind refers to fan speculation. We'll start with mind because it's the simpler one. Think about Terezi. She's a mind player, and she was able to help the story by being that person posting on the MS Paint forums, speculating what the story was going to do next based on what she had available. Terezi was a detective. She would see the future of the story based on logic, and she would be able to pick the best outcome. She viewed the story, as a fan of the story, a very enthusiastic one, and that's what those kind of, from a meta-narrative standpoint, I've already mentioned, I think that this has a quantum mechanical interpretation too, in terms of like amplitudes, but her seeing those possible plot threads, her seeing that entire possibility space, and picking the optimal one, is a lot like a fan posting what they think is going to happen or what they think should happen on a forum. And so I think that's what mind represents, is the fan speculation, and how and that has an influence on the story. Especially Homestuck. QC himself was reading those forums. He was reading the fans. The fans had a legitimate influence on the story, like quite literally at times. And I think the mind aspect refers to that aspect of maybe Homestuck specifically. But I think going forward in interactive media as we go forward, just a lot of other things too. I think mind is an important part of storytelling that's becoming more important as time goes on. Heart, on the other hand, is also very interesting. Heart is fan interpretation, and obviously all these aspects, these meta-narrative is not like a deep. This is supposed to just add on to everything. Everything that you thought about Heart is still true, but I think that this is a cool thing to put on top of everything else. So from a meta-narrative standpoint, and I'm saying that word a lot, and I'm probably beating it to death already, but so Heart refers to fan interpretation. So we already mentioned Terezi, being that person posting on the forums, thinking about what was going to happen next. Think about Nepeta. She's the one making the fan fictions. She's the one, really thinking about the characters, thinking about going on her own adventures with the characters, thinking about who she has a crush on. This is that explosion that Homestuck went through during the troll arc, especially, which is, characters become very beloved, and everybody gets their own interpretation of the characters. And I think that the overall message that the story had with Heart was a really cool one, because eventually we got to Dirk, and Dirk, when we meet Dirk, we start to really get information about splinters and like splinter selves and multiple selves and who is the real self, and there's this ultimate kind of true version, and this would have linked back to the Platonic ideals thing, because that true self that's referenced, and I'm not sure I'm using the terminology that they used, but there was reference to this like kind of true form of yourself, and that you had all these other splinter selves that contributed. That true self is like the true Platonic self, and all the splinters are like shadows, just like in the Platonic, the Plato's cave. All the splinters are, people's own interpretation of the true self. But at the same time, it's kind of paradoxical, because everybody's conglomerate interpretation of a character, the character is only defined by people's views on them. So, Nepeta is who she is from all of her versions, even though all of her versions are based on this one true version of herself. It's kind of a recursive feedback loop. And the same is true of the characters. I think this was where the really cool message comes in, is that I think in that discussion of the heart aspect, to a lesser extent, Hussey was, or Hussey, or whoever, I don't know how the fuck you're supposed to pronounce his name. People get mad at me no matter what I say. But I think there was kind of an admission there that the characters themselves are only as deep as the people think they are. I mean, maybe I didn't say that right. I think every character in Homestuck is just a conglomerate. You should never hear what someone thinks about a character and think that they're wrong and you're right, because both of you are right. And it's only everybody's interpretation of a character that make the character what they are. It's this ultra contribution to a character as a whole. I don't feel like I really explained that well, but I think that you probably catch my drift, at least. And I think that the evidence is there. Hopefully nothing I've said so far feels like a stretch. I really don't think it is. The only thing that I think could feel like a stretch is the hope and rage thing, and I don't think that's a stretch. And luckily I already have the audio recorded for that. I think people can probably... Maybe it's just because I've sat with these thoughts for so long that I think these are so reasonable. I don't know. We'll have to see what you guys have to say. Maybe I have to defend myself more here. But that's what heart and mind are. They're fan interpretation and fan speculation, respectively. They represent the audience, the crowd, the people watching, the people reading, the people viewing, whatever you want to call it. My heart and mind are very much... If you're a heart player, then you have a meta-narrative affinity towards the audience. And the audience's participation in the story, which could vary depending on the type of media. But anyway, that's heart and mind. Blood and breath. Let's get to blood and breath. So blood and breath, I think, are the most obvious to some extent. They refer to the author's priorities when it comes to writing a story. What does the author, what is the writer, what is the person making the piece of media value in that piece of media? That's blood and breath. Blood and breath represent kind of inverse kind of complementary. All these things are complementary, right? I wanted to like get rid of that word opposite. I really feel dirty that I said the word opposite. These things are inverses. They're complementary. You need one to have the other. Where there is one, there is the other. But these refer to narrative priorities. And it's really easy to point this out because you can just look at John and Karkat's arguments about movies. What does John, as a breath player, value in a story? Well, he values swift action. He values, movies that have a brisk pace, that have a lot of different things happening, that have plot twists, that have action, that have suspense, pacing, really good pacing. That's how optomisticDuelist, that's how Taz put it in his YouTube video, is pacing. But I don't think it's all pacing. I think a lot of pacing could go contributed to time. But anyway, no, I think it refers to, when you value a story-driven story. And it's interesting to think about this because think about, what was the story, what was Homestuck like when John was the main character in those first 4 acts? Well, you had some really endearing character interactions and you had some character development, but you'll have to admit that in those first 4 acts, the emphasis, the focus on the story was in the progression of the story, the events happening, the crazy plot loops, the crazy plot twists, there was a lot more, there was a much brisker pace to everything. It was more like Top Gun. It was more like the movies that John likes in those parts of the story when John was the main character. And I don't think that could possibly be a coincidence. Then you had the trolls introduced, and things became much more character focused. Things became much more dialogue driven, much more relationship driven. There were suddenly things happening in the story that were happening because of one character liking or disliking another. That had never happened in Homestuck up until the trolls. You'd never had some kind of, think about like having a story arc in the human arc where you had, trolls going on like revenge arcs against one another. This is very relationship driven storytelling. And that's what Blood is all about. Blood is all about when you prioritize sorry, my mic died and I got distracted. Blood is a prioritizing of relationships and character development in a story, whereas Breath is more prioritizing plot itself and the progress of the story. And I think if this was spelled out more, people might not have gotten so disillusioned from the story when it shifted from part 1 to part 2. Part 3, I think, was supposed to be a unification kind of Breath and Blood in terms of what the story was trying to do. I think it definitely veered way more towards Blood, and who knows why that is, but yeah, I think that's what Blood and Breath represent. What do I have left? Let's see. Blood and Breath, Heart and Mind, Rage, and... Do I really... Oh, wait, I have 4 more. Okay, so I have Time and Space. This one's easy. Time and Space are the stage. Maybe you could say that Blood and Breath are the author. Maybe, something like that. Or the author, what they value in a story. I don't have a good one-word kind of summary of what these are, but maybe you do in the comments. Who knows? But anyway, which one was I talking? Oh yeah, Time and Space. This is the easy one. Time and Space are just the stage, and the stage and the pacing, right? In order to have a story at all, you've got to have a narrative, a sequence of events, time, and you've got to have a setting. You got to have a stage. You got to set the stage. You got to have space, time and space. They're the simplest ones, but they're essential, right? You can't have a story without a place that the story happens and a narrative. Those are like the most primal things you need. You can't have a game session without a space player and a time player. You can't have a story without a setting and a narrative. Those are the simplest, most primal things, and you need them, and that's what they represent. And I don't have a whole lot more to say. I wonder how... I never wrote that video because I didn't want to, because, what is there to say? I don't really know what else to say about that. That's what those are. And then finally, Life and Doom. Life and Doom are kind of why I made this video, because I saw Taz, Optimistic Duelist's latest video. Maybe it's not his latest anymore. That guy cranks out videos like crazy. Where he, I gave him permission to mention this theory because I had talked to him about it before, and I felt the need to expand on what he said, because he said that Doom and Life referred to agency, and I know why he said it, but that's definitely not how I would put it. I think agency is something I would very much more credit towards Life, or not Life, sorry, not Life. I would more credit towards Light or Breath, but I see where he's coming from. I'm not saying that anything he says is wrong. I don't really like saying that people are wrong when it comes to this sort of thing. I just want to add interesting stuff on top. But I would consider Life and Doom to be referring to the character arcs, the emotional aspects of a character arc, the highs and lows, the peaks and the valleys, the emotional peaks and valleys specifically of the characters' arcs in the story. That's what Life and Doom are about. They're the heart of the story to some extent. Not to discredit Heart at all, but I do think that that's what Life and Doom are, and I think the evidence for that is clear. Again, look at Feferi and Jane. Those are our 2 Life players, right? So Feferi, she's a witch of life. She manipulates life. She manipulates the highs and lows of people's character arcs, and boy did she jack up Eridan. Eridan, he dug his own grave. Don't get me wrong. But you gotta realize how dramatically she picked up Solix's life and put down Eridan's life, just in terms of their emotional arcs in the story. And I could go on and on. I do have something written for Life that I never quite recorded. But, let's move away from Feferi and think about Jane for a while. Jane is the maid of Life, and maid, I think, is implied to be one of, if not the most passive class, besides the whatever the Cheer Up Girls class was. I can't remember. I'm bad with words. People are going to probably be horrified that I can't remember certain characters' names or classes, but my memory is garbage. You got to realize this. I have notes. That's what I have, and I'm not looking at them right now. But what was I talking about? Right, Jane, the maid of Life. She was, I think, maid is the inverse, or the opposite class, the dual class to John's class, heir. Heirs are set to inherit their aspect. They receive their aspect like a sword being handed to them, whereas a maid just kind of inherently is born with it and has it, and either has it taken away or derives power from it. And in Jane's case, she very much had her maidenhood, her lifehood, her positive energy in her life. All of that was just kind of yanked away. Ironically, when she reaches the god tiers, she becomes this soulless robot, right? She has had her maidenhood, the positive influence on her life, the happiness. She had this really nice childhood, right? She had maybe the calmest, most chilled out. The introduction to Act 6 was all her, just kind of having the happiest looking life ever. And then immediately when the story starts and she comes of age, that maidenhood, that positive energy starts getting yanked away from her by, just her own teenage angst, by Jake himself, and then later, from a story standpoint, by the Condess, right? She doesn't have much control over her emotional character arc. She is very much whisked around by the story and very much has a lot of the happiness in her life taken away. And it's up to her as the maid of Life to kind of, this is where the agency comes in, take that positive energy back for herself, right? And we see her doing that towards the end of the story, and she's still doing that when the story ends. She doesn't quite get there. It's going to be an ongoing thing for her. It's going to take her a long time. But I think that's what her plot arc kind of revolves around, is getting agency over her own emotional arc back. And that I think hopefully people realize that that's not the same agency that I'm talking about when I talk about Breath or Light. That's not plot agency. That's not control over the story. That's control over yourself. That's control over how you roll with the punches, That's Life. And then Doom is almost the exact same thing. That's what's cool about, these aspect pairings is, one is complementary. If I've explained one, I've kind of explained the other. Doom is the low points in a character's arc. Just look at Solix. Solix has absolutely no control over the story. He cannot get over his own shortcomings. He just, he's challenged constantly by his aspect. Doom is a difficult aspect to manage because, just look at Solix. Just look at his bipolar disorder and how his, how do I say this? I'm sure people can fill in the blanks. Honestly, I felt like I did a really good job explaining Life. So maybe I'll do an intentionally shit job explaining Doom and let people fill in the blanks there, because I think you get it. Just look at Solix. And I think there's a lot more to Doom than that. Maybe not from a meta-narrative standpoint. I don't think this is the be-all, end-all interpretation. This was not the central thesis to the videos I was making, but it was the one thing that I felt like was entirely original and that I hadn't heard anyone else say. I think that Doom also has a strong correlation with mind in, its kind of quantum mechanical interpretation of alternate timelines, those doomed timelines. I don't think I ever really saw anyone make that connection between doomed timelines, the word doomed, central to that, and the aspect Doom. I think that what Solix was experiencing by hearing the screams of the imminently deceased was he was actually hearing his own screams. He was hearing himself in alternate timelines where he had fucked up, and he had, and that he was hearing versions of himself in doomed timelines as he died in those timelines, and he was able to, use those to be a prophet. I think that Mage is kind of the more active or more passive, I'm really sure, version of the Seer, where Solix was able to be something of a prophet because he could hear himself fucking up and dying constantly and yelling at himself. But because of that, his character arc was just a miserable mess because he could not stop seeing the worst versions of himself all the time. And he just kind of had to be the sacrificial lamb to some extent. I think I actually explained that really well just now. I'm really happy with how this video is turning out. And yeah, I think that's it. I think have I covered all of them? Breath, yes. Light, yes. Time, yes. Space, mind, heart, breath, void, hope, doom, blood, rage. I think I did all of them. So that's it. 25 minutes. Those are my meta-narrative interpretations of all of the aspects. So let's just summarize real fast with single words, if I can do it, just to see if I can. Breath and blood are the author's priorities. Pacing versus character development. Light versus void is the meta-narrative spotlight versus not being in the spotlight, right? You have the whole setting if you have the spotlight and everything around the spotlight, the complement to the spotlight, and that's light and void. Space and time are the setting and the narrative, the stage and the plot, the stage and the act structure, whatever you want to say. Rage and hope, plot coherence and plot contrivance. I think opposite of what I just said. Hope is plot coherence, rage is plot contrivance, and I'll hopefully put that video out shortly. Maybe I'll come back to that now. No, maybe I'll come back to that at the end. Let me finish explaining these. Life and void are, or life and not life and void. Life and doom are, positive and negative, the peaks and the valleys of a character's emotional arc, and then mind and heart and mind are the plots, the fan interpretation and the fan speculation, respectively. I think that's it. Let me try again, because I feel very eloquent right now. So let me try again with hope real fast and try to remember some of my major points. Maybe there will be a video on this at some point. The audio, like I said, has been recorded already. But I think Eridan, think about his whole science thing. He really, for some reason, wanted to believe that science could explain everything in Homestuck, and there was no magic at all. And he continually contradicted that with his own wands and shit. He was a prince of hope. He was routinely destroying his own notions of what should be true in the comic itself. And another one is, I won't be able to talk about this one here because it's very specific, but if there's a very specific thing about Eridan's ancestor, who was, I can't remember his name, but he was the Bard of Hope, and a Bard is the more passive destroyer class. He's the one that kind of just passively lets the plot fall apart, and everything that you read about that guy has absolutely no explanation and no elaboration, and has incredibly far-reaching implications. If you read specifically, go back to the giant Flash video where all those trolls are talked about, and listen to Vriska's ancestor talk about that character, and you'll see 20 cans of worms opened up and none of them ever closed. That character, the Bard of Hope, could have showed up and closed those gaps. He just kind of chose not to. He just chose to stand there like an asshole, flirting with everyone and letting the story fall apart. Gamzee I've already talked about. I had more to say about Eridan. What did I have more to say about Eridan? I can't remember, but this is almost 30 minutes long. So anyway, there you go. That's that's just a short kind of summary of what I was planning to kind of cover over the course of the rest of my aspect videos. This is not me coming out and saying that I'm done making those videos. That's just me coming out and saying I was sick of keeping it a secret. I didn't really want to keep it a secret. I just wanted to make the videos as good as they could be. But at the moment, they're just not a priority in my life. And the majority of the time that I feel inspired to make the videos that I want to make, they're not Homestuck videos, and I feel guilty about making them, and I don't like feeling guilty about making videos that aren't Homestuck videos. I don't want to gimp my Homestuck fans, because those are the people that watch my videos, but Homestuck is over right now. The things I'm doing in my life are I'm playing new video games, I'm doing math. Those are the things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the things that I'm currently doing. I was able to kind of ride that hype train in my mind when I was making the Homestuck videos initially, right? I was super excited about it ending, and that's where a lot of the energy came from for me to make my videos. But now the story is over, and my hype is yet to be retrieved. I love Homestuck. I'm gonna read Homestuck again one day, and when I read it again, I'll probably feel inspired to make more videos. But I don't want to pressure myself to make videos. That's not why I made this channel. In fact, I made a deal with myself when I made this channel that I would never pressure myself to make anything. I was very, very ambitious when I started my Homestuck project, and I am not willing to close it because there's a lot more stuff there. But I wanted to get these thoughts out there. This theory is important to me, and I know a lot of other people. I know it's important to a good amount of other people too. So here they are. That's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. When is the next video? I don't know. Like I said, I have the audio recorded for a Hope video, and I have some of it edited, and I have yet to find the motivation to finish it. And if anyone has a suggestion on what I should do with that, please let me know. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching, and have a great day, everyone.